check a few boxes. But thanks to everyone out there for tuning in. My name is Eric Obenauf, and I'm the editorial director and publisher at $2 Radio. I've been looking forward to tonight's event ever since we started kicking around the idea for it, and I'm really grateful to Hanif Abdurraqib and Billy Ray Belcourt for agreeing to take part in it. On July 14th, in the United States, we are going to be publishing Billy Ray's nonfiction debut, an essay collection called The History of My Brief Body. It's absolutely magnificent, and it fiercely grapples with issues such as colonial violence, identity, and sexuality. What I think really rises to the surface is just this quest for joy. It's one of the books that really reaffirms for me what we're doing as a book publishing company in the first place and why we're putting books out into the world. And we literally cannot be more excited for it. Another one of those unique and special books that I feel so fortunate to have been a part of was Hanif Abdurraqib's essay collection, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. I feel fortunate not to only have worked with Hanif, but also to read all his subsequent books, which are all marvelous, and just to live in the same city as him as well, and to see to witness all that he so graciously provides for our community. And I think, just to be in his orbit is something that I am so thankful for. Another participant that we have in today's conversation is Andrea Tritschler of Moon Palace Books, a terrific independent bookshop in Minneapolis. And Andrea, we're thankful, has been a generous early booster of A History of My Brief Body in the United States. And Moon Palace Books has been nice enough to offer pre-ordered copies of A History of My Brief Body. And so if you go to Moon Palace Books website, you can pre-order the book there, and you can get it inscribed by Billy Ray as well. And I believe there's an option where you can put who to have it inscribed to additionally. I know also there are quite a few people tuning in from Canada. The History of My Brief Body is going to be published in Canada by Penguin Random House, and they're a terrific team, and I know they've been working tirelessly with Billy Ray on the book since its inception. And we've also had the pleasure to interact with some of the folks there, including editor David Ross, who's been really special, and publicist Abdi Omer. Tonight's event is part of this ongoing series that we have that we're calling $2 Radio, which is that little icon somewhere on the screen. And this includes, it's spearheaded by our publicist, Molly Delaney, and this includes everything from podcasts to video supplements to these live virtual events. And the next one that we have lined up is this Friday, featuring two fierce female authors, Yelena Moskovich, author of Virtuoso, and Sarah Rose Eder, author of The Book of X. And then for anyone who's interested in rewatching tonight's event and sharing it on social media, or even just sending a link to a friend, we're going to have it archived on our website, which is $2radio.com. Just click over to the $2 Radio page, and you'll find it archived there. So I think that's all I have to say. I'm going to shut up now and turn it over to Andrea. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Eric and $2 Radio for getting us involved in this. It's amazing to be able to do events like this in the times. A little about Moon Palace. Like Eric said, we're in South Minneapolis. We sell new and used books. We are also a cafe and a music venue, or were, and hopefully will be again at some point. We love Billy Ray and Hanif. We've had shelf talkers for both of your books. And so we're really excited to be a part of this You know, a couple coworkers and I, we read A History of My Brief Body, and we just couldn't shut up about it. We probably annoyed all of our other coworkers trying to get them to read it. It really is just stunning and honest and bleeding, and it's amazing. So again, a little on the pre-order, moonpalacebooks.com. If you have the means to order one for you, for your friends, for your neighbors, it's really a book you will want to share with your community. And there will be, in checkout, if you go to instructions, you'll see a box there in the additional information section. So that's where, you know, you would put all of that. Again, keep it short. And if you have any questions throughout that process, you can email info@moonpalacebooks.com. We're happy to help, but be patient. It may take us a while to get back to you. Okay, and so for our wonderful authors, why we are here, I'll introduce Billy Ray Belcourt. He is from the Driftpile Cree Nation. He is Canada's First Nations Rhodes Scholar. He is the author of the poetry collections Indian Coping Mechanisms and This Wound is a World, which was awarded the 2018 Canadian Griffin Poetry Prize, the 2018 Robert Kroetsch City of Edmonton Book Prize, and a 2018 Indigenous Voices Award. In 2018, Belcourt was named by CBC Books as one of 14 Canadian poets to watch, one of 18 emerging writers to watch, a writer to know, and one of 10 young Canadians to watch. A History of My Brief Body marks his nonfiction debut. And joining Billy Ray is Hanif Abdurraqib. He's a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. He is the author of the acclaimed essay collection, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. His poetry has been published in Muzzle, Vinyl, Pen American, and various other journals. His essays and music criticism has been published in The Fader, Pitchfork, The New York Times, and MTV News. He is the author of 2 full-length poetry collections, The Crown Ain't Worth Much and A Fortune for Your Disaster. His most recent book, a New York Times bestseller, is Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest. And if you all have questions for Billy Ray and Hanif during the event, you can ask them in the Q&A section, and we will get to them at the end of their conversation. And I'll hand it over to the 2 of you from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Andrea, and thank you to Dollar Radio, and thank you, Billy Ray, for doing this. Billy Ray, I love the book, but I first want to ask, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing, yeah, as well as possible. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I mean, are you, where are you at right now, and how are you getting through the days, or what propelled you through some days?
So I'm in Vancouver, and you know, past few weeks I've spent a lot of time with my partner. That's sort of, and his dog, and that's the primary, you know, method of passing the time. I've also been doing a bit of writing, but not a whole lot. A lot of reading actually when I can. Yeah, how are you?
Same. I mean, I also have a dog. My partner and I have a dog, and I feel like a dog. Dogs are great time passers because they themselves, I feel like, have such an unnatural relationship with time as we know it, and an unnatural relationship with like our presence too. Like, I feel like my dog is very much just happy that she knows I'm around more than I used to be. But other than that, you know, like, what is a day to a dog, or like what is an hour to a dog? And so I feel like I'm adapting my dog's relationship with time. Well, as I said, I love the book a great deal. I read it on a flight in one sitting, and then read it on the flight back home in another sitting. And before this book, I was so in love with your poems, and wondering, the question that I think you will, if you have not gotten asked it a lot already, I can imagine you will get asked it because it gets asked to me a lot, is the question about like the how. Like, how do you write different genres? Which I don't think is that interesting of a question, but for me, I'm more curious about how you decide which mode of writing will govern your ideas, or how do you decide which mode of writing your curiosities are begging to be unfurled inside of?
Right. I think that I'm attending to the same subject matter that I tend to in the first 2 books of poetry, and I'm providing a different kind of spotlight on, you know, these autobiographical experiences on these past selves, hopefully to bring different contours to light that perhaps the poems didn't. And I think writing in the mode of nonfiction, it ratchets up a kind of vulnerability that poetry can sometimes obscure, even though some may, you know, bring to poetry or the reading of poetry the belief that it always already reflects the writer's history. Nonfiction allows for little ambiguity. So it's almost like, on the one hand, a kind of honoring of, you know, the past selves that led to my current writing self, and on the other hand, a kind of self-abolition. There's a sort of desperation or destructiveness that I think one can, and that I have brought to the experience of something like memoir.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that troubled me first about poems, because I wrote at least something close to nonfiction before I wrote poems, was that there was an assumed distance between the speaker and the reader, or the speaker is not necessarily the self, or does not have to be the self, whereas nonfiction, particularly in this book, in your book, it is assumed not only that we are being spoken to, that the speaker is the self, but in parts of it, I felt very much like the speaker was in the room articulating the story to me directly. Has there been, have you had the moment yet where you have felt the discomfort of like, oh no, this book is going to be in the world and everyone's going to read all this stuff, you know? I'm not saying that you should feel that way. Like, I don't know, that might not be something you feel at all, but I know that that is, when I realized that I was a speaker and I was asking people to kind of like rub up against my real life in a very raw way. When my book of nonfiction came out, I had that moment where I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a couple mini bouts of anxiety past midnight over the last few months about the fact that I will have little secrets left and that people, many, you know, who I don't have any idea of, will have really robust idea and image of me. And I think, for example, of the number of sex scenes in the book, also these moments of human despair and failure that reflect someone who is not me, but, you know, necessarily those things necessarily happened, you know, in order to generate me in the present. I've also thought about, you know, being a professor and the possibility of, you know, students reading this work. But I think those things actually are symptoms of a larger problem, which is that we tend to think of others, especially those in public life, as, you know, being readily available for critique and for scrutiny. And I don't know if I should, and I shouldn't, you know, give into that.
No, I'm excited. I'm so excited you said that, because I've been thinking a lot about, particularly lately, and in revisiting your book, I was thinking about this too, about what the writer owes the public. And I maybe want to get back to that because I wanted to ask about I mean, there are parts of the book where you talk about utilizing, I mean, before, you know, before getting into the text, you'll be like, you know, this utilizes a form of poetry and nonfiction and fiction. And I was interested in how you decided, in like at what parts of the book you decided to differentiate that, because for me, the book, and maybe this is because I'm so familiar with your poems too, but the book flows poetically throughout, like formally, structurally, linguistically. And so I'm wondering where and why those parts in the book you decided to differentiate, like, you should know that I'm using fiction and poetry here, as well as nonfiction.
Yeah, I think that was partly out of an anxiety about whether people would demand, proof that, what I was writing in this particular essay, for example, Future Romania is a section of the book where I say that, this uses both poetry and fiction to do something like memoir, because, yeah, a bit of the worry about whether, I would be called on to prove something. And I also think, that that's another misconception about nonfiction, about like human self-documentation more generally, which is that we have faith in our ability to, perfectly recount the past, that I think isn't practical or isn't realistic. And, what I'm more interested in what actually emerges in that space, where one loses faith, or when what happens, has necessarily shape-shifted in order for it to become a legible memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the oddest things that I wrestle with, just as a writer and as a living person, is that I often feel that, and I know that this isn't just particularly this nation, or what have you, but we're a country obsessed with proof and showing, but also a country obsessed with forgetting. You know what I mean? And those two things often have these odd intersections for me. I look now and I see so many places eager to quote unquote reopen, and I've been trying to steer away from that language in particular, because that doesn't really mean anything to the people who are workers and the people who are out in the public, other than that they are more at risk. And reopen sounds really flippant, but I think that what so many places are getting at is a return to normalcy, like a comfort and a return to normalcy, and hope that this will be forgotten. But we are also, I think as readers and as curious people, are obsessed with proof and showing. So I'm glad you touched on that, because I think the thing that I have been working through in nonfiction particularly is how to be beholden to memory while understanding that memory is faulty and memory is a privilege, to not only be able to have memories that you can access, but to not have traumatic relationships with those memories is a privilege. And so if it isn't too heavy of a question, I'm wondering how you navigate the faultiness of memory while staying just really clear. I mean, the writing in the book is so clear, and you're such a reliable narrator. I'm wondering about your relationship with memory and how you access it and how you stay true to it when you can.
Right. I think recollection is a losing game, and, to fool oneself into a devotional, relation to recollection is perhaps a detriment to creativity. And I think, as a poet, we learn what to do in the fissure between past and present. I think we're better suited to, standing at that intersection and, seeing something worth talking about. I also think about settler colonialism as a structure of amnesia, cultural amnesia, the forgetting of the brutal violences that created countries like Canada and the United States, the active forgetting of ongoing, brutality against Native life, Black life, all of which, undergirds the emotional subject of the nation, I think in both the U.S. and Canada. So to hold those two valences is tricky and awkward, because we know, on the one hand, that to remember or to refuse forgetting is to vitalize the concept of indigeneity, to refuse it to be made into a lost object, something outside of the present, but you know, memory can only afford us so much. You know, we also have to, as you know, future for dawning people, you know, we have to sculpt the future in the image of our radical art, of our philosophies. Yeah, so there's a lot of contradiction that comes with doing the work of nonfiction and cultural criticism and a kind of political history, when what we want to inherit, a decolonial future, is still so indeterminate.
Right. And I don't even know, a thing that I've been thinking about lately too is I'm fighting always against nihilism, you know what I mean? Because it does seem like the project of forgetting is so ingrained in the States. And I'm always speaking for the States because I can't speak for Canada in the way that you can. But it's so ingrained in the States that I have often questioned in my own work, cultural criticism specifically, whose job is it to lay these reminders upon people, right? And to what end? Like, to the detriment of my own work, my own mental health, my own energy. I think a lot about Little Richard, who we lost this weekend, right? And the world that Little Richard occupied was many things, but it was also a world where he consistently had to remind a largely white establishment of what he accomplished, right? In order to be taken seriously in the halls of history, in order to be credited with the things that he innovated. He had to just never take a day off of just loudly and eagerly reminding the world of what he had done. And I know that there are moments where I should feel perhaps proud of that or excited by that or see that and feel uplifted. But I think I came to the conclusion, and now, sorry that we're talking about music now, but I think this is framing my thinking around this. I came to the conclusion that it's just very sad for me to consider that someone's achievement is the work they gave, the work that was revolutionary, that was radical, and that was all these things. That should be there. That should be the work. And instead, the work can be a lifetime of reminding because of an eagerness to forget not only the foundational violences that a country was founded upon, but as you said, the kind of all the violences that follow. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. I thought about that when I was spending time with your book. I thought about that as I was like writing my own stuff recently, about where the job of reminding crosses over into an exhaustion that perhaps doesn't feel fair to the greater body of work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's an affective condition that is disappeared. I think that we seldom undertake the act of self-documentation, self-connoting both an individual and a nation, without bruising ourselves. And, perhaps if nothing else, this reconfiguration of time that the pandemic has inaugurated can allow us to, rethink our habits as writers, as critics, and whether, when to figure out when too much, is being expected of us. I often think about how immediately audiences can expect a kind of emotivity, especially when the speaker is queer and indigenous, etc., other racialized subjects. And there's an instance in one of the essays in the book where I talk about how after a reading, someone came up to me and asked me, not to kill myself, and that was, what made sense in her listening experience. How the listening experience is a contaminated one, emerges from a history, is structured, but all kinds of, norms and expectations that in the end actually contribute to the disruption of Indigenous flourishing and livability. So our generation of writers and artists, we're at this, we're in this interstitial period where, the revolutionary work of those who came before us seems, to be translating into tangible outcomes but at the same time, there's still the active resistance to, the world that we are trying to bring into existence. And the reality being, and I think this is, one that can bring about despair that I've always tried not to be swallowed up by, the realization that, a lot of what we're fighting for, we won't experience for ourselves. So there's a kind of compassion and selflessness in that, that I think is actually incredibly profound, in that, our generation, and perhaps even, the generation that precedes us, of artists and activists, etc., should cultivate and, should ward off the nihilism that I think can closely shadow that emotional orientation to the present and to the future.
Yeah, I was thinking about the biggest hurdle for me in terms of organizing, particularly organizing with like an abolitionist framework, right? Broadly, but like also specifically, is pushing past the idea that I need to see the results of my action in my lifetime, which I think also means, at least for me, reframing my idea around productivity. Like, what does productivity look like? What does it matter if I can't be there to like take a bow at the end of the work, right? Does that not make the work as valid? Does it? So I think a lot about productivity in terms of these things too, in terms of activist work, in terms of writing, but in terms of understanding that if I got caught up in the fact that I likely would not be around to see whatever the next evolution of this work is, if I got caught up in thinking about that, I don't know if I could take to any work, be it writing or organizing or just simply caring about people, right? Like caring about the people around me. I feel like we went down a pretty heavy road, and I apologize. But I also want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, because we're a thing that I think about a lot too is how the writer gets consumed by the public. And you had mentioned the person coming up to you after reading, and you mentioned that in the book as well. And I was wondering how you navigate public consumption, and are you perhaps prepared for that consumption to change now that you are offering like nonfiction in this way?
Right. I'm reminded of another, instance in the book where I say, or where I look at responses to Indigenous writing by cultural critics in Canada. This drive to enforce a kind of simplicity on our work that, obfuscates the political resonances or the revolutionary demands of the work, or the aesthetic, uniqueness of Indigenous writing. And I think that's partly because of this long tradition of hearing in our declarations of pain simply proof of our ability to speak and nothing else. And to breach what I call, or what I describe as this it's like sound barrier of liberal historical ignorance, that there needs to be a whole chorus of radical voices singing, the same song of refusal and rebellion and beauty. I also think of the kinds of speech that Indigenous people have been allowed to make in public life. In Canada, the trend over the last decade has been to confess to one's pain, as if, the confession itself is a kind of action on behalf of the states, where, you know, allowing us to even speak about our trauma becomes the beginning and the end of political action. And so being aware of that kind of context means that the writer, the Indigenous writer, you know, has to come up with tools to subvert it if we want, you know, the political messages of our work to actually ring through. And I think probably why the book is written in this multimodal way, using poetry, nonfiction, and even these sort of thought experiments, and nonfiction, is because, you know, to speak in one register means, or is to, you know, leave oneself vulnerable to misunderstanding. And I think if we require an audience to think in a number of modes, then perhaps optimistically that means that, you know, we can subvert this problem of sort of emotional shallowness. But I also think of a podcast I listened to with Tommy Orange recently, you know, where he actually says he didn't set out to write a political novel. The label of political is, you know, thrust upon Indigenous writing simply because of, you know, the history that precedes any Indigenous writer. And that makes me think that this whole like auditory mesh of norms and stereotypes always threatens to subsume the work, to corrupt it. But I also know that there are, you know, folks in the margins who don't constitute the public of public life, or the audiences of literary festivals, who, you know, don't hear this sort of sob story, or don't hear simply confessions, but, you know, something more nuanced and complicated. And I think, you know, that fact is what nourishes the writing, I think, for me and for other Indigenous writers in this country, that we can speak to one another, you know, without fear of what we say, you know, reifying what they've heard about us.
Yeah, I think a lot about the quest to identify certain work as political, which is also a tool of forgetting, right? Like, I think the ability to put work in that box and kind of set it aside, in a lot of cases, suggests like an unwillingness to actually engage with it, or to pull it apart for the sake of what mirrors might be found within it. I want to ask, just like, I know I've been asking like talking about some like heavy shit. I want to ask just like a very baseline, kind of interesting to me, but like not too hard and heavy to think about question. What were you reading? Like, what was kind of beside you while you were writing this book?
I think, interestingly, I was reading a lot of fiction because I was trying to write a novel, and a lot of actually what became essays in the book were my attempts at writing this kind of autobiographical novel. And so I was reading, you know, Rachel Cusk's Outline trilogy. I was reading Ben Lerner. I was also reading, as I always do, a lot of poetry. I you know, cite Ocean Vuong a lot in this book. Richard Seikin, Anne Carson, Claudia Rankine inspired my approach to a lot of the vignettes or fragments in the books. Sarah Manguso's approach to nonfiction also, you know, resonated with me. You know, I sort of unpurposefully started writing in the kind of, you know, the school of fragmentation, if that is a school, and, you know, noticing that linearity wasn't the aesthetic force behind the writing, but emotionality, or, you know, political truth, and that was inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, I'm big on fragments. I love a fragment. I really fuck with a fragment. And I think, well, because I felt somewhat, and I still do, feel kind of trapped by linearity in a way, or I feel like it is like a very narrow hallway for me to operate through, where I really love, I just love fragmentation. Fragmentation has always felt to me like, you know, being taken through a structure with endless rooms, and all the rooms kind of have their own living and breathing aesthetic, but the structure is the same. You know, the structure, I feel safe within the structure, but the rooms are where the risk is being taken. And so I really rely on fragmentation. Not that, I mean, you know, every now and then I'll like drop, like fuck with a linear thing, but I often feel like I can do like several short sprints as opposed to the marathon. I really love that. I feel like I want to leave room for questions, and I see like the questions piling up, and so I don't want to be selfish with the time, and so I feel like I should pass along to the Q&A section.
Okay, sure. Let's see.
Should I read a bit from the book? Would that make sense?
I would personally, I would love
Yeah,
that.
I would love that.
Yeah, just a quick bit. I'll read from the title essay, A History of My Brief Body, if I can find it. Okay. Let's start with the body, for so much is won and lost and lost and lost there. There are over 17 million results when one Googles, is it possible to cry oneself to death? To be queer and NDN is paradoxical in that one is born into a past to which he is also unintelligible. I wasn't born to love myself every day. There is a dead future with my name on it in the territory of my people. There isn't much one can do but run when the future becomes roadkill. I didn't wish to find out what it might take to incorporate roadkill into the everyday to drain it of shock value. One would likely need to sacrifice inner life, uninvented. In Introduction to the History of Art, which I took years ago, the instructor informed us that photography, much like portraiture, enticed many to rethink the contours of the self, also sometimes called the soul. Perhaps in leaving, I didn't choose to be soulless. I chose instead to continue looking at myself. The eyes of a man I sleep with are dead, like an empty street, always on the verge of mutinous activity. His face emits a kind of explosiveness and impressionability, so much so that I suspect any man could get him to drop his underwear once more were he instructed accordingly, even though he has just orgasmed. Strangely, this makes me think of a special viewing of Barry Jenkins's Moonlight I attended in Oxford. The film hadn't been widely distributed in the UK outside of London, so the theater was full of queer and Black students, all of whom were there not passively to consume a film, but to be bodiless for 90 minutes, to have the unbearability of their longing momentarily suspended or supplanted with another's. This is also the closest I've come to a definition of love. When the credits rolled, I realized that even though the film had gotten under my skin, ruptured it, eviscerated it, the experience of affection wasn't mine, wasn't private. Sometimes when I fuck not in the name of futurity, but as a symptom of a romance with the negative, a romance with my own indurability. Perhaps there is something queer to be said of the act of running around without a skin. It is our luck as NDNs that the horizon of love is unreachable by ship or feet. When my ancestors had nothing, the night was still devoted to them, to being the body's negative space. We are children of war for whom the earth is a collaborative work of art. We fold the sky into little flowers and keep none to ourselves. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for reading. I just love the book so much, and I love hearing you read it.
Okay, so let's see what, yeah, thank you for that. Let's see what people are asking. So we have a question. I recently read Moon of the Crusted Snow. apocalyptic fiction from a Canadian Indigenous writer. Do you have any favorite Indigenous writers outside of your genre?
Yeah, totally. I mean, outside of my genre is basically no genre, but I will say I really, there's so many writers who are Indigenous doing incredible work in Canada. Ariel Twist, Jay Simpson, Joshua Whitehead, Leanne Batasmasak-Simpson, the list goes on and on. These are actually mostly queer, trans Indigenous writers. In the US, I think many of us know of Tommy Orange and Tommy Pico and Lily Long Soldier, Jake Skeets. There are, there's so many of us working right now. It's really a beautiful thing. And it's no longer, a singular voice or a small, trio of voices, but a full, chorus of us.
Okay, and then we have someone who I would love to hear Billy Ray talk about the influence of Jose Esteban Munoz on his work. While people ask questions.
So Jose Esteban Munoz was a cultural theorist who passed away recently, much too soon. And his two books, Disidentifications and Cruising Utopia, have been integral to my own consciousness raising and are, part of the foundation of my writerly voice. And it's partly because, in his books, we are allowed to feel both the terror of the present, but also, and more importantly, the beauty of the future, and a future that is, sculpted by queers of color. And there are so few texts that allow us to position ourselves at the center of political imagination. And, that's a profound kind of permission. And so I always, his work always rings through mine, and I quote him, and, I've used his, a line of his as an epigraph in my first book. And yeah, I figure I'll always, be writing about and with Jose Esteban Munoz.
Let's see what else. Okay, sorry. Yeah, let's see what we got. So I'm intrigued by the way you speak about how people are not poetry if we live in language, if language is the mode through which we think, feel, and understand what happens in the world. How do people escape or transcend this mode? I don't know about that.
I'm not sure the point or intention is ever of escape. I think, even Munoz, whose work, suggests a kind of escapism, never, or would have, as in my reading of him, wouldn't have suggested a kind of anti-present politics, because the present is where we are, it's, even if we are stuck in it or stuck with it. And, we can generate these pockets of radical life, even in the most oppressive of conditions. And so I guess the question then is, how do we wield language in a way that breaches, the boredom or thick haze of normalcy that is the present, and how do we allow it to, illuminate something else, something different? Yeah, I think that's all I got.
Great. Let's see. Looks like we have a couple of others. We have one about the dogs and what their names are.
Right.
Let's see. This quote for Billy Ray: I love your poem, The Earth Ringing in My Chest, published in the catalog for, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, the Inabawin exhibition. Can you speak to the context of your collaboration with this exhibition and its artists, and how your work engages with Indigenous visual artists more generally?
Yeah, so this was a poetic response to exhibition curated by Danielle Printup, I believe, that was shown in 2 galleries in Ontario, Ottawa most recently. And I was asked just to respond in whatever way to the series of works. You know, these works included Tanya Lucan Linklater, a beautiful video of where, you know, youth engage with, you know, the cultural practices, and there's a kind of like knowledge transmission going on. It's really beautiful. Yeah, I feel lucky that sometimes I get to pretend to be a visual artist because they put my words on gallery walls. Even though I always feel like it flounders in comparison. But yeah, that's something I've done and hope probably will continue to do.
Well, let's see. So we have a couple people asking, you know, been saying you've been reading more than writing these days, and sort of what you all are both reading right now. You're
Yeah, so I recently read Brandon Taylor's Real Life. I'm just looking at my books here on my desk. I'm, you know, almost done the Topeka School of Ben Lerner. I just read Etel Adnan's Time. Yeah, those are 3 I guess I would offer up. Victoria Chang's Obit, so devastating, that book.
Yeah, that Victoria Chang and the Brandon Taylor book. I'm halfway through the Brandon Taylor book, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. It's been hard for me. It's been hard for me to read new things that I haven't read before. It's been hard for me to experience a lot of newness, I think, because the uncertainty of newness in an uncertain time is maybe too much for me. So I've been revisiting books I like a lot, poetry, especially Gabrielle Calva-Caressi's The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart. The Wanda Coleman New and Selected that just came out. I've been spending time with it, which is like new but not new, you know. Adrian Matika's Map to the Stars, I revisited and really have loved reading. Elizabeth Shooter's My Body is a Book of Rules. I spent some time with some parts of that, which is not poetry, but I was like doing some kind of like hybrid text thing, and I think she's experimental and brilliant, so I've been kicking that book around for a bit.
great. Let's see if we've got, I don't know where we're at with time, maybe like 1 or 2 more questions. Can you speak more about the ethics of care and how to carry this forward?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually cheat a little and go to an essay where I do this kind of thinking. I think, you know, what I have to say, I've already said in this essay. It's about caring in a more feminist sense. So I'm thinking with the theorist Maria Puig de la Bella Casa. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. So falling in love and falling out of love illuminate the deep ambivalence of care about which Puig de la Bella Casa writes. Care doesn't easily retrieve us from the fragilities of cohabitation. It plunges us into a zone where everything shapeshifts, where everything is a potential site of severance and constitution. Care is a disruptive thing because it frees the analytic of the world from a state that is overdetermined. And so those of us who still want love in the couple form dwell in the instabilities of caring for that which also has the power to undo us. But always with care, we perform high stakes processes of world making in the hope that in our dying days, we might feel freer. So I've done a lot of intellectual in care because, you know, it doesn't shy away from contradiction and paradox. And I think, you know, concepts that do, you know, actually destabilize us or paralyze us. And I think that the ethics of care, in a more decolonial or decolonial feminist valence, means that, we have to practice a kind of radical non-singularity, the refusal to forget that we are always enmeshed in the lives of others. And that's a very, Judith Butlerian line of thinking. And I, especially, and it's useful, for thinking about how we relate to each other when, physical proximity isn't a possibility right now. How we are always proximate to each other in a metaphysical sense, allows us, just to refuse to corral others in zones of cruelty.
Let's see. I don't know. Should we end on that? You want to read anything else before we go?
Yeah, I could. I'll read the last vignette in an essay called Futuromania. Until today, I railed against the grisly fate reserved for men like me. I'm an anachronism in the way that all queer men are anachronisms, far too early. I'm a poet in the way that all queer men are poets, not a novel thought likely. Ours is the audacity of begging for what Maggie Nelson called a compassionate wilderness. Jose Esteban Munoz says, the queer citizen subject labors to live in a present that is calibrated to sacrifice our liveness. I don't need a record of my here-ness. What I do need is to take ecstasy with Jose Esteban Munoz. Paradise is wherever he is. Until then, I will try to be a pretty wound at least once. Confession, I'm not yet comfortable taking my shirt off in a poem. Subjectivity abuses, subjectivity rescues. Men shoved my head into the clouds. I missed so much. There is humiliation in this dystopia too. Here, my words appear in the air upside down. My mouth is a dirty floor. I'm sweeping up the dirt with my imagination.
Thank you. Thank you both. And $2 Radio. I don't know if Eric's gonna jump back on, but thanks to that. Yeah, thanks to you all for putting this together. And
thank you. Yeah, Hanif and Billy Ray, we're so grateful for you guys' willingness to take part in tonight's event. Andrea and Mood Palace, thank you guys for hosting and for your willingness to accept pre-orders for Billy Ray's book. History of My Brief Body is going to be out in the US on July 14th. And so if you go to Moon Palace Books website, they have a pre-order link up on the main page. You can get it inscribed, but Billy Ray is going to be nice enough to sign it for you. You can buy a copy for friends too. And I did also want to say too that tonight's conversation, we're going to archive it on our website. So if you go to $2radio.com and then just click over to the $2 radio page, then you'll be able to check out the video and share it, post it on social media, or share with friends. But that's all we got. Thanks again.
thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, guys. Appreciate it. Talk to y'all soon.